Hi there, and thank you for clicking on my video. This video is going to be covering the Ocucore with respect to the new Nightwave uh, augment, if you will, for the weapon. Turns the Ocucore into an absolute powerhouse. Gives status chance, crit chance, and a reload to magazine. Pulls from your ammo pool on kill. We're going to be going over. We will be covering new builds today, at least giving one, just a good place to start. Nice solid build. Because in order to gain access to this, there isn't a too high of an MR requirement. And the Sentience Wrath comes from Nightwave, so it's not particularly hard to farm. Or Sentient Surge, sorry. So new build, very basic. Sentient Surge is going to be our source of crit chance. We have Hornet Strike for damage, Barrel Diffusion for multi-shot, Target Cracker for crit damage. Again, we're going to be using Sentient Surge for our crit chance, so we just need a mod for crit damage. No Exilus mod going to be used, Gunslinger for fire rate, and we're going to mod for corrosive. Barrel Diffusion, multi-shot, and Pistol Ammo Mutation is just to sort of help out, because you're probably going to be holding the trigger down for a while, and just being able to bullet hose everything and have that little bit of a backup. Obviously, isn't anything wrong with that. If you are a new bro, it's okay. I was one at one time too. And you start getting stronger mods, feel free to swap over to Ruinous Extension. This weapon is pretty ammo efficient. So you're not really relying too much on pistol ammo mutation to keep your ammo efficiency up, so you can just keep holding the trigger, right? But Ruinous Extension is a little bit of a harder to get mod. But it does affect how far the beam goes, and it affects the tendrils that come off the weapon. And as you progress, you're going to want to swap over from Gunslinger to Lethal Torrent. Do not invest heavily forma-wise into this build. If you do want to put some forma into it and you find that you enjoy it, and even going up to like Steel Path, like I have no problem in Conjunction Survival at the Steel Path level. Just throw a couple of Vs into it, so 3 Vs and a D is going to be a good time. And just don't forma too heavy into it, because as you scale up and get better mods and arcanes, you're going to be changing out your build, and obviously we're going to cover the Steel Path build. So 3, 2, 1. Okay, new bro build done. Alright, so for a pretty generic flare build, it's really, really strong. It's corrosive heat. Going to be using flare as our base damage. Gets us up to 480, which is obviously pretty strong. Galvanized Diffusion, Prime Pistol Gambit for crit chance, and Sentient Surge allows us to get to about 100%. Target Cracker is going to be crit damage. And we have modded. We have 3 mods for Elemental. Going to be going Corrosive Heat. Obviously, you do have the option of running a heat frame and maybe using the Prime Heated Charge slot on this build as something else. If you wanted it, you could obviously, at your discretion, obviously. So say if you're using like an Ember or like a Neja, where you're going to get heat stacks on whatever that is, like from their abilities, you could swap over for, Creeping Bullseye, put that here, and get a faction mod here. If you wanted to go for like a raw corrosive build, right? Then swap out Jolt for Convulsion. Ruinous Extension is going to be the Exilus slot for all of these builds. We aren't going to be doing Riven builds, because even with a Riven, this weapon just doesn't feel like it needs it. And so Cascadia Flare is going to be our base damage. So pretty basic, multi-shot, galvanized shot for more base damage and status chance, which is a big deal. Prime pistol gambit, crit chance, target cracker for crit damage, sentient surge for crit chance, status chance, and the reload. We are not leaning too heavily into fire rate, but with this, I would highly, highly, highly recommend using velocity. And as of June 17th, 2023, velocity earlier today was about 100. Now it's 115. This is definitely something, if you don't have one, I would recommend grabbing. Like velocity, like arcane velocity, arcane strike, arcane acceleration, arcane tempo are fantastic arcanes to have. Energize is not, obviously energize is a really big deal. Especially if you're like just powering up for the first time, like you're gaining stuff. Energize is definitely a highlight once you get it. But right now, honestly, I don't feel like I use it that much. But I am finding pretty regularly I'm running a fire rate or an attack speed mod on the frame, so I can free up a slot on whatever I want to be like really strong. So if I want to do like a primary carry build or a secondary or a melee, I'll use that arcane slot to move fire rate or attack speed off of whatever I'm using onto the frame, and it'll free up a faction slot just as a little bit of a comfort build if I'm thinking I'm going to do like a longer run or there's the potential to. But 115, if you haven't farmed this up, this is definitely something that's in the buyable category. It's nothing insane like a Guardian, Grace, or an Energize, where they're a little bit more expensive, right? So, food for thought. That's where our fire rate's going to be coming from, is we're going to be using the Arcane. And let's actually see the damage on this. We'll see what we're dealing with. We're going to come back to the Mecha set. That's going to be the final build. So, but Velocity's here. Just a general, really tanky Grendel. Lots of armor. But yeah, Velocity Grace. Obviously not going to be using Velocity, and everything will die before the Mecha set really gets affected. Or really starts to help out. Takes a minute to build up, but because we're using Flare... Alright, well the Mecha set helped at the last second. But you're gonna get 4 to 5k on the tendrils, which is the big, like, where most of our damage is going to be coming from. The tendrils deal about half damage. So having more damage obviously helps mitigate that. Obviously it's going to get cut in half. Faction mods help out. But most of your damage, even though your main beam is going to be quote-unquote 100%, like it is going to be 100%, but because you're going to have so many tendrils, you're going to end up dealing more damage to those targets in terms of like total damage dealt, because even though they're 50% a piece, there's going to be 4 of them. Well, that's still tripling your total DPS, right? So, pretty standard build. If you want to lean into the dot, Rhino Roar, it's a helmet ability. Corrosive works really well with Eclipse. I think that's been proven. I'm a little late to the game on this, but Evasions did a build talking about those interactions, so I'm not going to cover them too heavily. But this wasn't the conclusion that I came to when dealing with this, and this isn't his build. It's a slightly modified one, but still same theory, right? So here's the build that I've been using. I'm okay personally with using faction mods. Some people don't like it, and that's fine. If you don't like, for this build, it's gas electric. And it is a Riven build. So for this, the Riven is crit chance, crit damage, just so I can get the faction mod on there. But we will do... Need crit damage. And creeping bullseye, just to deal with like the polarity issues. The 20% isn't too big of a deal because, again, velocity. But we are going to swap out for 9090s. Reason being is there's a reason I am on Grendel. Normally I don't recommend like a full frame setup, but God, this weapon performs way better with it. So Rivenless setup, it is gas. Actually, I'm not running corrosive. Let me go back to the other one. Where are you? Okay, it's not going to hurt us as bad. If you're running Grendel, like if you take what I'm saying now and apply it to like a corrosive build, you need to make sure that corrosive is stronger modded wise than whatever the buff is that you're giving from Grendel's Nourish, right? So I'm running a triple Umbra setup, and that's my sole source of strength, so I'm getting like 130 something in terms of strength. So I need to make sure my corrosive has a stronger weighting than that to keep it a corrosive weapon in terms of like getting stacks, right? But also because there's the extra status effect essentially on the weapon. I want to keep it corrosive against Grenier. If it's against Infested, you can do like gas electric, and then it's just all just kind of a meme at that point. So let's take a look at this. This is going to be the one that I found when I was using this, and I don't enjoy recommending them, but you can get some pretty nutty damage out of this. There's glaive mods, and this was brought up. I used Mark of the Beast. I didn't like the ammo one. This was the first mod I thought of. On 6 melee kills within 6 seconds, 110% status, and a 120% status, 120% crit chance for secondary weapons. It's basically half the bonus of Sentient Surge. But still, it gets us slightly into oranges. Obviously is going to help status, because we are using secondary encumber. And the logic behind this, and I'll show the interaction, is we're going to abuse the Mecha set to get rid of the downside that was mentioned on beam weapons. Not that encumber is really that big of an issue. This is a bullet hose weapon, or a beam hose, if you will, a water fountain of pain. So the encumber does proc on the tendrils, and the unique thing about this weapon is that the tendrils are homing. So the issue with the encumber, or not the encumber, the Mecha set, right, is it innately, due to how it procs, your pet marks a target, and to truly abuse the set, you need to be able to apply as many statuses as possible to whatever that enemy is, right? So following that logic, the benefit of this gun with the Mecha set is that each of the beams home onto a specific target. You're not dealing with an AoE. So the issue of getting encumber stacks on a marked enemy is completely nullified by this gun because each of the beams are homing. So it's not like doing like an Ogress, like the Kuva Ogress with like Nightwatch Napalm, where you're over proccing heat, or maybe you want to take advantage of the Mecha set and apply more statuses to get, viral corrosive, radiation, and an AoE. You don't have that issue with this weapon. So saying that like encumber isn't bad on the is bad on this, it gets nullified by the Mecha set. And with Grendel, the Pharaoh stays alive. Like, I haven't had any issues with it really going down because you're killing so fast. The Pharaoh doesn't have a chance to really get knocked out with anything. So let's take a look at the damage. First kill is going to be the pain, but there's a trick because we're using Grendel. Those of you that use Grendel know this. We have enough power strength, like I said. We will be able to full strip on one vomit. We're not running a ton of power strength, but it is the Umbral set. and you can see the stacks building, and the mecha set does what it does. Now there is a bit of a pain in the ass with this, and it's part of the reason why I would highly recommend using a Riven. Is this setup really needs a faction mod? Technically, you can get rid of Creeping Bullseye and rely on Sentient Surge. There's nothing wrong with that. But you better not reload at higher levels, right? Though Grendel does make this significantly easier to get around. Just due to having the armor strip built in and having the additional viral, you can strip an enemy, and provided you have Nourish on, you'll always have viral in your weapon. You should be able to melt them. So this isn't like a die-hard need, right? Swap out one of the heat or toxin mods for a 90 and move Sentient Surge over and drop a faction here. But obviously that's not ideal because gas doesn't care about modded damage, right? But we're just trying to get a dot on it. Electricity loves, electricity mods. But gas doesn't care. It scales like slash, right? So let's check out that damage. Grab our viral. So it's not too potent yet. Once we get stacks, it does way better. But you're going to be using Grendel's abilities a lot to compensate. But you can see Encumber putting in work, right? So about 500k on the Mecha set nuke. It's not anything to write home about. We can do better. But you're starting to see the philosophy on that. If nothing has armor, gas electric is fine. So it is what it is. It's a little bit of a cope build, but you can get around it pretty easily. Even crit chance just to make sure that you're critting more often than not. Nothing wrong with that. And then we can do... Hold on. We'll go back to the tox. There we go. Alright, so we got our fire rate back. A little bit status chance. We're gas electric again. Alright, so how do we actually abuse this set? Oh, hold on. I need to do the glaive also. So, Mark of the Beast gives crit chance and status chance. Now, the status chance, because we already have so much on the weapon, is obviously going to be a positive, right? Oh, the slash procs might kill everything. Well, let me just get the stack then. Nope. Mecha set killed everything. Hold on. Okay. Up here at the top, 120%. It's additive to the other scaling of mods. It scales off your base damage. But as we get kills... Let me reload. But as we get kills, and the viral from Grendel is helping out a ton. Our damage will stay up because we're using Grendel's viral. But the reason why we're actually being really stubborn about using gas electric is because of an interaction with encumber, sources of damage, and gas electric due to the nature of how they stack. And more important with the sources of damage. And I don't know if I'm going to go too much into this interaction because it's pretty abusable. I reloaded. There is a bug with this weapon right now. In terms of the mecha set, I wouldn't expect you to have seen this, but... Okay, they just died. Hold on. I think I gotta do it slower. Yeah, currently if you're using the mecha set and you're killing a mecha target, or a mecha set targeted enemy, and you reload, you just lose the damage. Like, hold on, I'll show it right now. Alright, good enough. No, I didn't reload fast enough, hold on. Alright, reload. Not fast enough. Yeah, you'll... Okay, I'm not gonna force that, but if you reload in the middle of killing something and you don't have any stacks, you just don't get the mecha set nuke at all. So, easy enough. But alright, let's do the glaive interaction. And honestly, this is about as complicated as I want my builds to get, even though technically you can get hyper sweaty. Like, you can boost it with, like, Arachne and whatnot. But it feels too sweaty to me. And the dot spreads, it's just to help, you know, keep it going. If you want something a little bit more easy to use, there's the Amalgam Furax for the fire rate. You can then technically swap over from velocity to the bonus damage on headshot. If you want to be, like, efficient with it, right? So on headshot, plus 300% damage for 18 seconds on secondary weapon. Obviously, that would be a big help, especially with the gas electric build. But it's getting a little too sweaty for me, so I'm not really gonna vouch for that. Okay, so what exactly are we doing with this build? It's a mecha set nuke. Most people sort of understand the basic behind the mechanics of the mecha set is apply statuses to a marked enemy, and it goes boom when you kill it, right? That's basically it. You want the 4 stack, ideally, having the 4 stacks of, or all 4 mods in the mecha set increases the size of the AoE, and it increases how often the targets appear. So with the 4 set, you can have 2 targets at once. So that's the big deal, which means it can also re-trigger on itself, right? So it is a bit of a big deal, but this build, or the mecha set, drastically favors like health tank builds, which is part of the reason why we're using Grendel. The mecha set armor is additive. It scales like health conversion, and mecha pulse. Frankly, if you're running like a solo mission and you're dealing statuses and stuff like that, and your kill rate is high enough, this is more of a snowball mechanic, will give you potentially more armor than everything else modded onto the frame. Because the 60 armor is multiplied by the number of enemies in an AoE. So, like, having 30 enemies near me, right, is 1,200 armor. Well, that's not too big of a deal because we have health conversion. But you can have more than 30 enemies, especially if you're playing solo and you're getting mobbed. So this can potentially scale higher than everything else. It's just limited by the spawn rate. But it can get pretty high. It's definitely beneficial for like a solo build. And the mecha empowered I've explained it before, but I'll just sort of go over it, is a additional, it, it's its own multiplier. So plus 150% extra damage against a marked enemy. So 2.5 times damage. If you deal 100 damage, you're going to be dealing 250. And it's its own category of multiplier. And this does double dip on like a faction mod. So if you are dealing a corrosive build, you'll get 150% after all scalings. But this does apply to dots, so like heat dots and like electricity, gas electric, thus the double dot build. It will apply twice. So if this triggers twice, it applies to the newly created gas clouds. And that's the philosophy behind this build, is do a reasonably mass armor strip, gas and toxin everything, get the double dot, and then on the nuke, it reapplies the status effect, and then you basically insta-kill everything. So it's a pretty simple status scaling build, but if you're stripping stuff, even against like conjunction survival, which is the hardest steel path enemies that we have right now, it's corrupted. Talking about builds elemental wise, Grenier is pretty easy to mod against. It's corrosive heat, gas electric against infested, magnetic toxin against corpus. But you do run into issues against corrupted because the meta physical element combination is slash toxin, and this weapon is radiation puncture. Not that it's reliable damage, but secondary encumber can get slash procs onto it. But it's not really a reliable source of damage. It's mostly about the dots, which is why we're actually going into using the encumber setup and trying to mod for base damage so much. So let's actually go into a steel path mission. I'll run this build and we'll get to the first acolyte and call it a day. So the gameplay loop, if you will, is going to go into conjunction, going to wait for the two enemies that spawn to spawn their dogs, going to suck everything up to get the max armor, going to cast Nourish, and use those first couple of charges to get the armor strip and easily stack the Ocucore. So that's sort of like a gimme that can be used. And from then we should basically just be off to the races, right? Like it shouldn't be any issues after that. But that's going to be the gameplay loop. Every now and then I'm going to throw the glaive, use the path assist, use a gas build against the infested, glaive against Grenier, Serrata against Corpus. It's a pretty good time. You could also do a Toxin Glaive Prime, right? Against Corrupted. Isn't too bad. But you need to make sure that you have the status chance to proc the Toxin. So you would want to go for like a Monster Toxin waiting and some status chance to be able to get that proc on there. But the Serrata does pretty good also. You just need to be able to get kills, so it's either kill to kill the Corpus or kill and aim for the corrupted Grenier, right? So pick one and just make sure to be cognizant of whichever weapon you have, and you're going to be aiming for those groups of enemies. And obviously there's like a couple of infested, but it's mostly Grenier and Corpus units, right? Oh, and the Mecha set on the Pharaoh. Pretty standard tanky boy build. It's a health tank, obviously, because we're using Grendel. Double synth, double mecha, takes up most of the slots. Animal instinct. We are using the viral preset mods. Little bit of CC, it's not ultra reliable, but I actually don't mind it. Yeah, the spawn, this is super. If it manages, because we're going on to the the conjunction survival, and there's so many like pathways. Obviously, there are big, more open rooms, but this pays dividends if you're on a mission, say, like Tavuni, where there's a lot of narrow corridors, because it can clog up a corridor and like CC everything that's in that corridor for a couple seconds. It doesn't spread very long, like along the hall, but it can clog everything in, say, like a doorway. So it's not a big deal, but it is another source of viral. We will be getting plenty of viral with this build. The provoke, and this is the main one that I would say keep on. The provoke affects Eximus units. It's not ultra reliable because you obviously can't target whatever you want it to spit on, right? But the provoke does trigger against enemy units because it's a taunt, right? And if they're not aiming at something, they're just running to an area. This can actually, because it's a 40-meter taunt, this can taunt most of a room. And if it hits an Eximus, everything will turn around and fire at the Eximus because it's a provoke, right? So, little bit of RNG, copium RNG, but this one is actually pretty noticeable. But other than that, synth fiber is just to help with equilibrium, and obviously increases the armor on the pet. It's going to be very, very tanky, and this just adds a tiny bit. I wish they scaled together, but they don't. But anyway. Gonna run some conjunction survival to the first acolyte. And I'll try to do a little bit of commentary. I think I was solo. Alright, we're gonna wait for him to spawn in the dogs. There we go. Get in my belly. Just gonna wait for the enemies to get here. Here we go. Gonna try to get our stacks. Need our armor. Alright, we're off to the races. And one of the things that does help is because of how, like, corridor oriented this tile set is, you do get the extra damage. It is noticeable from the gas and electric AoE. It does help out a lot. And one of the other benefits of running gas electric is, say what you want about gas electric, but in terms of elements that get rid of overguard the fastest, they are the best elemental combo. As mean as that is to say to something like viral and corrosive. So even though the tendrils are considered like single target damage, gas and electric deal status procs on status damage in an AoE on status proc. So it's like I have a couple of little AoEs. So the damage is much more... Oh, no guy there. A little more palatable than you would think. Because the status chance is so high. And the fire rate is kind of decent. You end up getting pretty consistent little gas clouds. And Encumber has no problem proccing, because the fire rate. And one of the tricks you can use, just taking advantage of the tile set. Proc your Nourish on Teshin, get that double stack going. And when you see like an Eximus or something like that, either eat them or vomit on them to show dominance. So there's an Eximus. Was an Eximus. And normally, because of the beam weapon and because of the damage attenuation, just use your glaive to kill the acolyte. Normally, like if you're trying to do like killing with a beam weapon, it sucks because of how their damage attenuation scales. Isn't really kind to beam weapons. Alright, there we go, 5 minutes. But, alright, pretty basic, comfy build. I've taken it up to an hour. That's all I can really quote-unquote certify it for. Doing like corrosive heat. I didn't like... It's a strong build, don't get me wrong. But at higher fire rates, when you come across an enemy with like overguard, and you're so used to killing something as fast as you do, especially at like lower levels, like say 100 to 180, and even, what am I doing here? 190, 200s, it's still not high level. It kind of doesn't matter what you use. They're just gonna die anyway. As long as you completely don't geek the elemental combo, it really kind of just doesn't matter. The enemy's gonna die anyway. They turned them all into paper. It's not like what it was. Like, I think level cap enemies are like 1 or 2% as strong as what they used to be. Like, they got nerfed hard when they did the combo counter and like the blood rush changes. So just run whatever you want, man. Just make sure you mod appropriately. You can run any combo you want because of like the helmet system. Like, you can put nourish on anything. So you don't really have to worry about like a specific combo. Like, if you want to run flare because you like the base damage, Encumber does come out ahead. And it's simple math. But it's because of the circumstance and the using it with the Mecha set. Because the Mecha set can spread statuses on top of Encumber. and because of the RNG nature of Encumber, in order to beat Merciless, I have to have 6 statuses, right? Because Galvanized Shot is 120 per status. And if I didn't have Encumber, I would only have the statuses available on the weapon, right? Unless you're running like the Panzer. But if you have Puncture, Radiation, Corrosive, or I guess Heat too, so that'd be 4. So you would need 4 Encumber procs that are independent of those to match up with the bonus that you would be getting from Cascadia Flare. And if you're running Merciless, you would need 3 additional procs on top of the procs that you already have to beat those. So you would have to have the 4 that you would be getting always from the weapon, but it's literally a 1-to-1 ratio on whatever the bonus is, because it's all additive damage, right? So Merciless is 360, Flare is 480. So for 480 divided by 120, you would need 4 statuses that aren't on the weapon, because you're getting those anyway. Which is pretty easy to do, especially with the Mecha set. It spreads the statuses so well. You're gonna get all of them eventually, especially if you're like with this. I love this room, and the other one where there's the big drop down when doing the conjunction survival. Not because the Mecha set benefits from it so much, which it does, especially in that one where the enemies are dropping down, because it just re-triggers over and over, and it's just constantly nuking. Like every 10 seconds, you get like a Mecha set nuke. But the Mecha set plays such a big factor in benefiting Encumber. It's just it's hard to ignore, but it requires this setup. So if you're doing like a general bullet hose, or you're an Eclipse or Roar enjoyer, mod appropriately. But viral, you've got the Panzer. You should be using the Panzer, unless you're farming. Then maybe swap over. But I always prefer to swap, like actually on my damage dealing weapon, I always run Corrosive Heat if I'm going to be going up against Grenier. Like obviously viral has its benefits, but I'm trying to kill stuff faster than a heat dot can proc. Because you need to be able to proc the status, which on this weapon is near instant, but then you have to wait a second for it to die, and I'm trying to kill it faster than that. Which also allows you, if you're running that sort of build, I know the Encumber set is on here, but because the Encumber can stack so many statuses, it just needs to get to a couple of statuses, and then everything after that is gravy. So it is what it is. It's just personal preference, but this build sits at about, I don't know, 1,000 kills. Well, no, it's 15 minutes was like 1,400 kills. So it's solid. Obviously, it's personal preference, and with this map, it depends on the room and like the connecting rooms. But it keeps up. You can kill whatever the hell is there. You just need to pick a good room, right? So, and the other thing is this setup can scale even more. One of the things I know I've been ragging on people about is to run the Mecha set when they're running in groups, especially if they know everybody, because the Mecha empowered bonus stacks, and it's multiplicative. So where you would get like a 2.5 times damage increase, everybody has their own targets. So if you have 4 people, everybody gets their own targets, and just due to the nature of like all the status effects, and especially gas literally blocking the icon, everybody's statuses can spread to the other marked targets, but you're not going to know where the target is all the time. So if you have 4 people running the Mecha set, that's 8 nukes on top of each other. So it's like if somebody gets the right combo on like a random enemy, you can basically nuke the map every couple of seconds. So it is what it is, especially if like you're doing like a camp or something like that. It's going to be kind of annoying though, because if you're trying to manage loot drops and stuff like that. Like, don't run the mecha set then, but it's free armor, it's free status spread, and it pays dividends with this because the encumber always stacks up because it's homing on whatever the mecha target or the mecha targeted enemy is, because all of the beams are homing. So this ends up being like a pretty solid build. And then you have like the status stacking from the mecha set, but I might make another video about that. Because it gets pretty abusable pretty quickly. But one of the things that you can do with the mecha set is when dealing multiple instances of damage and multi-shot counts, is it affects, like each source of damage spreads its own stacks. And you can see this with like the beam weapons, right? With no multi-shot, and then you put multi-shot on, and it'll affect the number of statuses that get spread. Not how many statuses get spread, but like you'll notice the stacks jumping. So like with Grendel, the setup that this one has can spread like up to 10 statuses. Obviously there's some RNG because of multi-shot, right? But can spread up to 10 statuses if you combo correctly. So you would put all of your you would fire at the marked enemy, and you would have viral from Nourish, and then right when the enemy dies, you would hit it with an enemy from your stomach, and if you time it right, it'll spread 10 statuses at once. So that ends up being like a massive nuke. So there's ways to abuse the set even further, instead of getting like, oh, everything gets dropped down into like one status, right? And then you have the climbing function on top of it. So, and that's affected by duration. So it's like you can turn a single heat dot into like 100 pretty quick. And then there's like the interaction with whatever that AoE is that stacks up, that like increases your stacks. I forget what it is. It's the helmet one with the AoE. That affects the mecha set also. So you can turn this into a nuke that deals millions of damage pretty quick. But that's the thing for another video. But in terms of scaling, this just outscales everything. And it's because of the mecha set and how it interacts with it, not because of the weapon. But anyway, thank you guys. Have a blessed day. Stay excellent.